spot. There's obviously no favoritism at YMS, but I think this is the best one. I might be biased because I work for an innovation agency, so I do apologize if anyone in a lab coat has accosted you and tried to get you in for startup speed dating. I'm sorry, but not sorry. Do go and check out the Future Tech Village. If you want some fresh ideas, you want some inspiration, you want to meet some startups, I encourage you to do that. So we've got a packed 90 minutes or so. We've got 3 great sessions coming up, and hopefully it's a great chance for you to really grasp what is happening when it comes to innovation. What are some fresh ways, fresh things that you can take from this conference? Of course, innovation is in the DNA of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, so of course it makes sense that we dedicate a whole track to this. So we're ready for our first session. Get some energy in here after lunch. It's important. Ready for the first session. So here from Flight Story, we've got Oliver and a powerhouse panel taking us through what AI is doing to supercharge marketing strategy. So let's give them a round of applause as they enter up. Keep the applause going. Let's keep the energy going. That's it. Keep it going. All right. Brilliant.
Oh, it's a great sound to kick this thing off, right? Oh, those spotlights are bright. Hello, everyone, and welcome. As we mentioned, we're going to talk innovation today. Just to give you a brief introduction to myself, I'm the co-founder of a company called Flight Story, co-founded with Stephen Bartlett. We're relatively new. We set up the business 2.5 years ago. We've scaled quite quickly. We employ 120 people. We do a range of things. But our central mission, the reason we exist, is keeping organizations at the forefront of what's possible. And for me, that isn't just marketing speak. For me, that means getting very comfortable with this thing that we all say a lot, which is change. And if I'm being very honest with everyone in the room, when I hear the word change or I see change, I usually resist it. It's a very human trait to feel that cognitive dissonance and to not feel comfortable. And that's what the majority of people do. But innovation is all about going against conventional norms and known truths. So you have a second choice, which is in what the minority of people do. You can lean into change, you can embrace it and take on new opportunities. So this panel is exactly that, and I do have some amazing people to share the stage with. So without further ado, I will introduce each of you, and then I want you to give me your 1-minute career life story. And I'll explain why just 1 minute, not just because of time. So let's kick off with James, Head of Marketing at NatWest.
Hi. Excuse me. Hi, I'm James. I'm Head of Marketing for Content and Distribution at NatWest Group. Fun fact about my career history is that it actually started here. My very first job out of uni was with studentbeans.com, and I believe, although I need this fact check, that I was part of the first ever YMS way back in 2012, 2013, can't remember. But cut a long story short, I am what is known as a lifer, which means that I have been at the same company for my whole career, other than that stint at YMS. I've done lots of things from acquisition to advertising, social media. I've launched lots of platforms. We've done new podcasts. We've partnered with all sorts of fun people, including Stephen Bartlett and Gary Vee and Oliver and all sorts of people. And yeah, that brings me to today, where I'm heading up the content team at NatWest.
Was that 1 minute? Maybe. That was probably good if anyone was timing. Pollyanna, you're up next.
Okay, so I'm Pollyanna Ward. I'm the Strategy and Planning Director at Flight Story. I guess I like a bit fun fact about me. So I've done my career the opposite way around to what everyone tells you to do. So I started in-house and spent the first sort of 8 years of my career client side, and then over the last few years I've spent it and gone to the dark side of agency. And I think that kind of gives me what my point of view is today when it comes to how I approach strategy, is sort of grounded in those fundamentals and those marketing principles that sort of get baked into you client side, but now bringing it to life through lots of different tactics and shiny new objects from the agency side. So that's probably me in a nutshell.
That was a hell of an elevator pitch. Less than a minute. And Grace, you've got to top that one.
Hi, I am Grace Miller, and I am the head of failure and experimentation for Stephen Bartlett and the Diary of a CEO podcast, which is now under Flight Studio, which is super exciting. I originally was in the aviation and travel industry and social media and marketing, and have been within Steve's company for 2.5 years now. Started in social and marketing, and then towards the end of last year transitioned to this role. And I think my fun fact is that obsession is a part of experimentation, and so that's what I always look for in people. And one of my biggest obsessions is F1, which is super random, but I love that people have an obsession outside of what they do at work. That's me.
That. I love that. And I'm going to start with you, because I know what everyone's thinking. Head of failure. Head of failure is a negative word, isn't it? Grace, firstly, what does a head of failure do? And beyond that, give me a perspective on why you believe innovation is important.
So yeah, everyone always laughs when I announce head of failure because it is negative and people are like, oh, is your job to fail? And ultimately, my job is to help the team run as many experiments as possible, and through that comes failure, but through failure is learning. So something Steve always says is outfail your competition, and it's like how many experiments or things can you try, and whether they work or not, you're going to outfail or succeed everyone else. So it's kind of like the 10% rule, where 10% of your things or whatever investments will succeed, and 90% won't, but those 10% that succeed outweigh the success or the failures, and so we kind of look for that. So if we run 10 experiments, if 2 succeed, that's amazing if we take more learnings from them than the 8 that didn't. And also, every failure has a learning in it. So that's what we kind of embrace within the culture as the failure side of my role. And then the next part was about innovation. So I guess the whole thing about it is if you're not innovating, you're really not growing within your company. And I kind of look at it, Jeff Olson, who wrote The Slight Edge, that's an amazing book about kind of innovating or like growing in your own life. And it's the little things you do each day and how you try different experiments or whatever you're doing, whether that's going to the gym every morning, will all either compound in your favor or against you. And so that's how I kind of see innovation. It's you're either doing things to help your business grow, or you're not doing anything and you're either going to be stagnant or get left behind.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful reframing of the word failure that comes with negative connotations. And the point around, you've got to do a lot of tests to work your way to the right answer, I think, is a beautiful philosophy. James, from your perspective, I've known you for a few years. You sometimes get yourself in trouble in big brand land based on wanting to disrupt, wanting to try new things. Give me a perspective. You work in a highly governed, complex environment with lots of stakeholders. How the hell do you innovate in that environment?
With great difficulty. So working in a banking environment, in financial services is a blessing and a curse. Obviously a curse because we are so heavily regulated, and anyone that works in a regulated industry will know exactly what I mean. Getting licensed to operate is harder than you would expect. But a blessing because we do operate in that environment, so the opportunity to be creative and to innovate is much greater. So the barriers are slightly lower, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, there's been situations where I suggested a few years ago that we launch on TikTok, and they were like, what? Why would a bank be on TikTok? Or a podcast, would you believe, is like shocking. So it's all about, taking inspiration and learnings from what we see in other categories, like lifestyle brands, fashion, beauty brands do this really well. They are at the forefront of culture in a way that lots of the traditional sectors like banking are not, I'm sad to say. But again, huge opportunity for me as a marketer. I'm like, okay, great. We need to be doing TikTok. We need to be on LinkedIn. We need to be on Reddit and Snapchat and where all the underpriced attention is happening. In terms of how I get that over the line, that's kind of where the blockers come in. But it's all about framing things as a test and learn. Everything's an experiment. Everything, if it fucks up, if it messes up, then that's fine. Let's put it down to a learning. And failure is good, and let's create that culture. There's a reason why Amazon and the Jeff Bezoses of the world got to where they are because they really, really cherish the idea and put value on the idea of failure and experimentation. So to cut a long story short, I just agitate my way through it. I say everything's a test and learn or a pilot, and 9 times out of 10, I'm proven right, which is great.
I love that. 9 times out of 10 get away.
Yeah, there's always one failure in this.
No, I think it's really important, and I suppose I imagine when you started that process, you start small with smaller wins. You know, taking a business onto a new channel with new investments, that's, you know, a big, meaningful step. But I imagine it's taken time to build up the authority and credibility. Do you have some perspective on some small wins that have kind of, you know, allowed you to, you know, earn your flowers?
Small wins. It sounds really silly, particularly for this audience, but just using creators, using talent to caveat, I work in business banking, so I look after our startups, our entrepreneurs, our kind of side hustlers, people flipping trainers in their bedroom. So it's not typical, like, here's a mortgage, here's a current account. So there was this kind of weird situation where I was like, I really, you know, am believing in the B2B influencer. There's a whole movement of people in that space. Stephen being one of the you know, well-known business influencers globally, and I wanted to jump on that. And that was like, we started small with, you know, small talent. We saw that it was working, huge ROIs, and then kind of took that and scaled that big time.
Yeah, I think it's an important point as well, because typically when we think innovation, everybody thinks technology, like this echo. I don't know what's happening. Robots are taking over. But yeah, we typically conflate technology, but for me, innovation is doing things better, doing them potentially cheaper, or doing them better. And it's finding opportunities in less walked paths. You know, rewriting rule books, those types of things. So even when you mention creator marketing there, I think it's a lesson to be learned in the fact that for some sectors and some industries, that is typically very inventive, innovative. Pollyanna, you said at the start of this thing, your roots in marketing were very fundamental-led. Give me your perspective on shiny new toys, fundamentals and shiny new toys and innovation, because sometimes they are at odds with focus, and how do you manage that relationship?
So I think whenever someone says the word innovation, I think lots of people's brains immediately go to like Tesla or Spotify or, you know, challenger brands like Tony's Chocolonely or Surreal. And I think a lot of brands feel like they don't have license to be innovative because it doesn't feel like, you know, something that they should touch. But I think actually if you then boil down to look at actually what innovation is, which is do something differently or change the rule book, try something new, experiment in a way that adds value to consumers so that they're more likely to choose you and buy you. I think whether you're a massive brand, a legacy brand, a challenger in B2B or B2C, you know, I think we can all agree that those are things that we need to do. And so coming back to those fundamentals, you know, every brand that you work with, whether you're agency or client side, you start off with what's the problem or the challenge that we need to solve and how will we know when we've got there. And I think that's where doing something different or novel or innovative is one way to get to that answer. But if it's not solving a challenge and there's not a way to measure it, then that's when I'm like, okay, that's a shiny object and maybe we don't need to do it. On the other hand, if it can solve it, absolutely, let's give it a go and a test, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the relationship between the two is very important. And we always talk about creating, you know, areas and permission to play. You need to find spaces to be able to do that. But fundamentally, 80 to 90% of whatever you're going to do should be somewhat tried and tested, modeled, etc. We can't mention innovation without mentioning robots, AI, you know, the greatest opportunity since the Industrial Revolution, or the greatest threat. Each of you, I'd love you to give me some practical tips about AI. We hear very vaguisms. So I want to just go across the panel and get a perspective of, firstly, how are you using AI in the workplace today? And how does your organization think about it? And I'll start with you, James.
Oh, God. So AI, I'm sure, like many of you in the room, I include myself, like it's a bloody minefield, and I don't think we should shy away from that. I think there are lots of people who talk a good game, but in reality, lots of people don't know what's going on. The truth is that as an organisation, we are taking it very, very seriously. I think we've, like many organisations across the globe, have set up kind of SWAT teams to kind of figure out all these use cases. And I believe, on last count, we had about 450 use cases for NatWest. In marketing, in the marketing department, we developed about 65. So various different ways in which we believe that we will be able to integrate AI to improve kind of customer outcomes or efficiencies or whatever. And that's right across the marketing disciplines. So from strategy and planning, research and insight, data analytics, and of course activations. I guess where we're seeing real benefit today is actually with our vendors, like the Metas, the Googles, Adobe, Sprinkler. There's all sorts of people that we're working with that have embedded AI tools into their systems that is helping us as a client, and that's been really, really powerful. And we're really interested to see how we can scale that and get some, efficiencies, both from a kind of time spent perspective, but also ROI. Where I personally see lots of opportunity as someone who works in content marketing is in the post-production space. We're certainly seeing lots of opportunity, as we all know. This is actually not new, but still relatively new for an organization to onboard. But what does generative AI look like from a content production perspective? When we were, it wasn't that long ago where we'd have to make decisions about a piece of content being, is this a static social? Is this a TikTok? Is it a YouTube short? Is it editorial? And by the way, we can't do all 4 or all 5. We just have to pick one because we just don't have the manpower to do it. Now, on the click of the button, we can do all channels really quickly. It's the same content, just cut up. Or you can edit a podcast into clips, or you can do multi-camera editing, or you can do social cut downs, you can test thumbnails. There's all these amazing things that we're doing. Very, very small, very, very, I think, on the micro level at the present. But if this is the worst it's ever going to be, it will only get better. And I'm very excited about what the future of content production looks like as it stands.
And you mentioned if that's been maybe the most impactful or the user case where you're seeing the biggest time savings, the efficiencies. Has this impacted the way that you think about agencies or any of your vendors?
Yeah, I think there is a big problem, dare I say it, for agencies to kind of get their heads around what AI means for them. I personally see it, as an opportunity rather than a challenge. Us as client-side marketers are now able to create our own TikToks really, really quickly. Like I say, it wasn't that long ago where that would be a real brief with lots of pound signs attached to it for agencies to produce. We're now living in a world where we don't need that. We can create our own content really, really easily. The agency model that could be a whole panel discussion on itself. I think where AI is not replacing the creative brain just yet. So we're still highly dependent-ish on agencies to help us with our thinking, I'm getting switched off here. Help us with our thinking, to drive things forward, to help us navigate kind of the landscape of media and the creative world. We're forever. It's a value exchange. We extract from them what's going on in the world. We kind of help deliver it in a way that wasn't the case before.
Yeah, and I always think there will be room for outside voices that don't have the curse of knowledge, that can bring fresh perspectives. Great thinking and great creativity will always be valued. I think what you're describing is very much the executional aspects of a work that an agency will be done. I imagine lots more of that will be taken in-house over the coming years. Pollyanna, from your perspective, and not, at Flight Story, some of the things our creative teams are doing in post-production is absolutely mind-blowing. But as a strategist, give me some tools and things that you're using that you go, these have been revolutionary for me personally.
Okay, I've got 3. So the first one, and I encourage as many people as possible to go and find, there's a amazing industry trailblazer called Zoe Scaman, and she published a piece on how to use AI in your strategy work. And one of the biggest things that I took away from that I use regularly is when there's a new brief or a new industry or a new landscape I need to get to grips with, I pair Perplexity AI, which is free, along with ChatGPT, which I do pay for, but using those two in tandem allows me to quickly understand the challenges, opportunities, the state of play, as it were, so I can just start to get an understanding and really start to dig into the more meatier bits, looking for human insights and things like that, on the other side of my job, but really understanding, competitors, challenges, opportunities at a broad level. That's been a game changer for me in speeding up that process. The second one is, previously, I'm a big fan of Excel. But previously, I'd have to go into, download Google Trends CSV reports, upload them into Excel, make some tables, make some graphs to show share of search data. Share of search, as we know, Les Binet and James Hankins proved that there was a relationship between share of search on Google and your market share and your consideration to buy. This could take me, a good couple of hours faffing around on Excel to make that. What I now do is I download it straight from Google, upload into ChatGPT, and tell it, make me a graph, show me the spikes and the peaks and the troughs, and then I know where to look. So yeah, little hack for you there. And I think the third one is really more just helping me create, whether it's creative briefs or showing showing clients what potential creative ideas could look like. I'm not a designer by trade or a content creator by any means, but if I need to visually bring something to life, being able to quickly mock up an image in Midjourney or ChatGPT has been amazing at just quickly getting those visuals across.
Yeah, I love that. And what you're basically describing is augmenting everything that you already do, the functions, the tasks, the thought process, but just using new tools in new ways. Perplexity is a really interesting one. I will second vouch for that. What Perplexity's mission is to be the most truthful search meets generative AI model. And everything that you see on there is referenced. So one of the problems with generative models, they say with certainty when they are wrong. It's called a hallucination. They will say facts that aren't facts. What Perplexity does is it takes that away. They've got this thing called collections where you can produce custom reports. So I think everybody go play on Perplexity if you haven't already, if you have any kind of reporting in your job. I think the second thing you mentioned there the third thing was around having a creative sparring partner. I think it's so important that we have different perspectives. And one thing you can do with these models that isn't often, talked about is you can eliminate ideas. You can ask for generic ideas and use that to eliminate things that may have already been done. You can get a perspective from someone that sits in a different country. You can ask it to be whoever you want it to be. So I think when you really get under the hood of these tools, they truly can be revolutionary, but it's really about empowering you to be better at your craft. Grace, Stephen is obsessed with AI. Absolutely obsessed. You must have some insight into things that are happening in your walls that gets you really excited. Let everyone in on the secrets.
The secrets. So, yes, we use a lot of AI in our roles, and I think kind of what James said before, is it perfect yet? No. For example, we've looked at clip cutters, and when they clip our podcast or a YouTube video, they aren't perfect yet and still need that kind of human element to review them and say, okay, that one is actually half decent. Sometimes they'll just clip the whole episode into 1 minute clips and it's like, okay, I could have done that. But I think the team we have a great chat called Staying Ahead in our Slack channels, and basically everyone will share new platforms or new things they're seeing online, so we can all share the insights and knowledge with each other, because 30 brains sharing knowledge is a lot more powerful than just one containing the knowledge themselves. Some people might have seen we've been trialing with AI podcasts. So similar to a platform like what 11 Labs have created, we've been building out AI podcasts there's two elements to it. We've been trying translated podcasts where the Diary of a CEO is translated through AI into other languages. So it's a robot talking, but weirdly it sounds like a human, which is crazy. And then the other side of it is AI podcasts, in terms of we will input either a link or some copy we want, and the actual system can develop an entire podcast and audio, voice, everything, and we'll like actually create it for you with music, like soundtracks, everything behind it, which is still wild to think that that actually exists. I think the fact Steve will sit in the studio for 3 hours recording a podcast that could now be generated instantly online is pretty wild. So I think in the podcasting world, we've been trying that, but there's so many different platforms we use in the back end, whether that's pre-release, looking for research, or like our bookings team when they're trying to find guests using different AI tools to help that process. The social team use so many tools, so I think it's the entire company using them, but they still require that human element right now to kind of check the results.
Yeah, you mentioned something really interesting there about knowledge sharing and creating space within the organisation to constantly be, there's an element of competition in that, right? That's really interesting. You're pretty competitive.
I do like a competition. But yeah, there is. I think it's nice because it encourages people within the team to go out and be innovators, as we said, and find knowledge. So I was listening to a podcast last night, and I heard a few different platforms mentioned in it, and I looked them up and shared the ones that I thought was relevant to the team. And so I think it's so powerful because I might find a platform, if I don't share it with Pollyanna, it might take her a few months and she could have really benefited from that platform being shared. So there's so much power in knowledge sharing.
Yeah, I love that. And AI podcasts is people have a mixed reaction to the idea that something that is now a very human art will soon or potentially be done by robot. I'm curious with the audience, put your hands up if you think the AI solely generated podcast will be a thing.
There's one hand over there.
We've got one hand. This is the innovation room. This room's biased. Come on. You don't think it's going to be a thing? Well, I'm going to say you're all wrong. But no, the reality is it is a fascinating space. And when you look at the leaps, I saw 6 months ago some of the trials that went on, taking topics and themes, usually very niche, pick a sport theme, anything that's very particular and specific. Seeing it didn't feel quite right, the tonality, the voice, and just seeing that progress in 6 months and the quality of content now being produced, I think it's going to be a surprising area of media in the near future. So watch this space.
To that, because podcasts get me very excited. But there's also, huge leaps in terms of barriers to entry. So you no longer need to have professional microphones or professional studios or professional cameras. You've got Adobe Podcast Studio where you, at a click of a button, you can take your voice notes on your iPhone and that will sound like studio professional quality podcast recordings. You've got Photoshop, Lightroom, and Adobe Premiere Pro as examples. There are other providers out there, obviously. But you can turn kind of quite low-level, grainy footage into kind of TV value, quality content materials. So
that was such a media-trained answer. There are other providers out there.
I don't want to offend anyone. But what I'm saying is, if you are a creator or you're a small brand and you want to enter podcasting, you don't need to invest lots of pounds and pence, which is what AI's enabled sort of lots of brands to do. So.
Yeah, I love that. Right, I want to quickly segue and just conclude by talking about social media. So we've mentioned generative tools, and my perspective on this is that we have already hit a bit of a peak content saturation. And when you lower the barrier to create, that's a wonderful thing. It means everybody that aren't inherently, they're not bound by technical limitations. What I will say is, though, I think it's going to be harder to stand out. And I also think that social media over the next few years will look very different. I'd love each of you to just give me a perspective on A, how you think you stand out in such a congested landscape, and B, where are we headed from your perspective as it relates to social media? And James, I'll start with you.
So for me, when it comes to social, there's I think of 3 different pillars that I always try and kind of leverage, and that is creativity, culture, and context. Creativity is going to be your superpower. That is any brand's biggest lever. You can have the smartest strategy in the world, but if the execution is poor, or if it feels vanilla and it's just a bit lackluster, then it just won't fly. That's just generally how social works. So creativity is by far the most important thing. It's more important than targeting. It's more important than kind of talent or not talent, or UGC or not UGC, all of that stuff. Just be creative. And context and culture is all about kind of how, why, where you show up for the people that you're trying to speak to. We've made lots of mistakes, and this is done through failure. You know, I tried to be that marketer that wanted to jump on trends. This song's trending, this dance is trending, let's do it. We did it, and it just bombed. It just like, who were we? It was disingenuous, it was inauthentic. So being contextually relevant to your audience or to your brand is super, super important. And then culture as well. Like, you've got to stay on the pulse. You've got to be a practitioner of social. If you want to be a social marketer, or you want to sort of be on social, best believe like you have permission to be on TikTok for 2 hours a day or be on YouTube. You've really got to understand how these platforms work, because it changes literally daily. And then the other thing is, go where there is underpriced attention. Like, if all your competitors are on a certain platform, yeah, but sure, go and try and sort of compete with them. But guess what? Like, no other bank is on Reddit at the moment. So I'm looking at Reddit. I'm looking at Pinterest. I'm looking at what banks are doing with Snapchat at the moment, and the return of long form. What does that look like? So you've got to, you know, and it comes back to innovation. It's an attitude. It's a mindset. So you've got to keep agitating. Do the things that you want to do really, really well. Stay creative, and yeah, hopefully you'll get some wins.
Here. Yeah. I wasn't expecting that from a bank, but absolutely. Drop the mic, Pollyanna.
I think, just sort of building on your point, I think when the barrier to entry is lowered, you have a higher sort of result of shit content, basically. I think of when Snapchat first, started launching ads, you had to spend 100K and work directly with their creative team. And the filters and content that came out of it were incredible, but then when they opened up self-serve, the floodgates were opened. And I think with image generation tools and AI, I think always just remember, just because you can make something doesn't mean you necessarily need to. Marketers are actually going to be responsible, I saw a stat earlier today, are going to be responsible for 30% of the content on the internet by 2030. And I think it would be nice if we could consider, if that's what we're putting out into the world, how can we make it good? So I think, and then bringing it on to sort of prediction side of things, I think actually we're going to see a resurgence of high quality and high production visuals and film director-esque creative. I think I'm a bit done myself with the UGC and the native TikTok QVC style content that we've got going at the moment. I think to stand out now, it's going to come back to amazing quality advertising, and I think AI can help us get that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we are entering a world where two things will be true. There will be hyper-personalization, where content's perfectly suited for your wants, needs, and desires. And then there'll be things that make us feel something bigger, make us laugh, make us cry, the things that bond us together. And I think that's the space where more brands should be playing and investing energy and resources. Grace, I want you just to quickly touch on that perspective, but we haven't talked about paid media much. And Diary of a CEO are famed for A/B testing their way to the perfect answer. It's become a bit of a folklore in your testing philosophy. Give us a bit of an inside track into what that is, and how is AI going to influence that in the future?
Yes, so we A/B test pretty much everything before it goes live, whether that's clips on social media, thumbnails, titles. We've even actually tested the entire podcast audiences through features we've built to understand what retention and what parts are the most interesting, and that's through like visual cues as well. So when someone looks away from the episode, we'll understand that they're not interested. This is all pre-release, so I'm sure people have heard Steve talk about, while the episode's on, he has a trackpad under the desk that he will click, and it's being recorded as the conversation happens. And we used Opus AI to track the entire conversation, and it'll highlight every section Steve clicks so that we can understand quicker and more efficiently what part Steve prefers the best, or likes the best, but then also would be most effective for us to use on thumbnails, on titles, even in the trailer. They'll go, okay, that part Steve found interesting, we could use that for a hook, or even on social clips. It's actually wild what one tool can do, let alone the whole process of, from that, we then take it to thumbnails and titles that we A/B test on Meta. We now use other platforms for that as well. So that's all pre-release. When it's actually released, there's even more testing that goes into it. YouTube obviously have their live thumbnail testing now as well. So when an episode's live, we will A/B test, or we actually test, I think, about 8 thumbnails that have been pre-tested when the episode's live, so that it's actually reaching new audiences. So there's a lot that happens.
Yeah, I'm tired listening to that. I feel like, where's that lab coat gone? You're more like a scientist than a marketeer.
Yeah, it's a lot. And then obviously Meta are bringing in so many AI tools that really help with your paid ads. So whether you have an agency doing that or you do it yourself, they've done like a background generator. They will now resize your images for you, which is so nice. And even they write the copy. So like literally all you have to do is just pick an image and drop it in. So it's super easy now, which is great.
Yeah, I love that. And I think if I recap kind of themes, you're all in alignment that the most innovation is integral. If you want outlier success, you have to fundamentally do things differently. Secondly, I think culture, having a culture of curiosity and testing and learning is integral to your success. And fundamentally, you're all aligned that at the heart of what we do is creativity. Creativity, telling stories in the most impactful and relevant ways. Just to leave, I want to leave everyone with some actionable tips. So, if each of you could share one top tip to be innovative or more innovative at work, one prediction about the future, and just share briefly, very quickly, your favorite failed experiment in recent years. James, you're up first.
You're going to have to run through that again. So the
top tip, innovative
one
at
at a
work.
time. Top tip for me is ask for forgiveness, not permission, and just develop that agitated mindset.
Love that. Prediction.
Prediction is... It's an interesting prediction you had, but it's not that.
Steal it if you want.
My prediction is that communities will become more important and creators will equally become important, but not for their followers, for their authenticity and kind of what their niche is.
I thought you were going to say Threads is going to make a comeback, but maybe not. Favorite failed experiment, one thing.
I've already given it away. It was me trying to jump on trends and be a cool content creator as a brand that just didn't work. Sorry.
Top tip, diversify your media diet. So watch the weird film, read the weird book, listen to the podcast on why cats meow, not bark. I think that's the only way you can think of new novel ideas. Prediction. Apart from that one, I think the next social media app won't be a social media app in the traditional sense that we know it. I think when you look at the next generation, think of Gen Alpha, for example, and how they're interacting with the big wide world. I think the next app won't be a social media app in the way that we think of it, like Instagram or TikTok, I think. Failed experiment. A few years ago, we needed to shoot a product in different locations. At the time, green screen was a thing that you could do. So we used green screen. The problem that we had, coming back to those fundamentals, challenge was we needed to increase the number of category entry points that our brand was showing up in. The success rate would then be the increase in frequency of purchase. We used green screen. Brand uplift study tanked, all the results were rubbish. Main thing to take away there is I think people knew that it was fake, right? They knew that those different locations weren't real. And I think it reminds me of an Instagram post I saw recently, which I think is maybe something for us all to kind of consider when it comes to AI, which is if you didn't put the effort in to write it, why should I put the effort in to read it? And I think that's quite a nice balance to have there.
I love that. Grace.
The first one, sorry.
Sorry, you've all got memory lapse.
I was listening to Pollyanna.
A tip for being innovative in work.
Oh, yes. Schedule the time in to actually go and learn. So whether you have to listen to a podcast, find something creative, actually putting that time in your calendar because it's not wasted time. Reading a book is actually so useful to learn and bring innovation and creativity to your role.
Amen. Prediction
that you actually will be listening to AI podcasts in the future.
There we go. Amen. Amen. Favorite failed experiment?
That organic followers and growth is way more powerful than paid media. And that's because of the quality of your followers and the community.
Okay, we could have a whole debate about that. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate the time, and thank you for everyone for listening.
Perfect. Guys, keep the round of applause going. That was awesome as they